They're vicious, and some of the most insane creatures on the planet. They are serial killers who have committed multiple murders. There are plenty of terrifying serial killers who have made headlines throughout the years, and some of them have been studied by psychologists seeking answers about the causality of serial killing. What psychologists have learned from their studies can perhaps be boiled down to one horrible truth. Under the right conditions, anyone can become a serial killer. The serial killers discussed below, though, aren't just anyone. They are some of the most horrifying individuals to ever walk the earth, who committed some of the most horrendous acts of human savagery. Warning: some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Number 10. Pedro Lopez, Monster of the Andes. Pedro Lopez's deranged killing spree is terrifying enough, but perhaps even more terrifying is the fact that Lopez's current whereabouts are unknown. The native of Colombia claims to have raped and killed more than 300 women across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. At least 100 of these were tribal women. In 1980, the Monster of the Andes was arrested and led police to the graves of 53 victims between the ages of 9 and 12. Lopez was found guilty of murdering 110 girls in Ecuador. He also confessed to an additional 240 murders in Peru and Colombia, and was declared insane. Incredibly, Lopez was released in 1998 for good behavior, and while there are plenty of rumors, no one can confirm exactly where he is today. Number 9. Albert Fish, the Brooklyn Vampire. When a serial killer is dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Gray Man, and the Boogeyman, it's almost certain he is thoroughly deranged. Fish was tried and found guilty of raping, killing, and cannibalizing 3 children in the early 1900s. However, he claimed that he had murdered more like 100 children, and even boasted that he had children in every state. What makes him stand out is the fact that he sent a letter to one of the mothers of his victims, 10-year-old Grace Budd. The letter detailed how he had lured the little girl, strangled her, and then cut her into pieces to eat over the course of 9 days. That is one letter that would make even Dr. Hannibal Lecter shiver. Number 8. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. For more than a year during the 1980s, Ramirez terrorized neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles with his murderous spree. Nicknamed Night Stalker, Ramirez would break into homes and brutally murder his victims, sometimes raping them first. In some of the photos, he posed with the severed head and shared Polaroid photos of his victims, whom he had raped, murdered, and dismembered. Many of the women and girls in the photos are shown to have been bound to trees with rope before Ramirez raped them, and afterwards having been killed by him decapitating them with a machete. His victims ranged from early 20s to a 79-year-old woman. His weapons of choice: handguns, knives, a tire iron, a machete, and even a hammer. Ramirez, who claimed to be a Satanist, never expressed any remorse for his crimes. He was sentenced to death. Ramirez died of complications from lymphoma while awaiting execution on California's death row. Number 7. John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown. There's deranged, and then there's the type of deranged that describes the serial killer John Wayne Gacy. He was nicknamed Killer Clown because of his job attending children's birthday parties and charitable events as Pogo the Clown. He was no clown. His occupation gave him easy access to potential victims. Gacy came under suspicion in 1978 when a 15-year-old boy, last seen with him, went missing. Soon after, a search warrant granted police access to the Gacy home, with the smell of nearly 30 bodies buried in a 4-foot crawl space under his home. Gacy was convicted of raping, torturing, and murdering 33 teenage boys over a 6-year period. He would lure them to his home, kill them via either strangulation or asphyxiation, and then bury them on his property. He was executed by lethal injection in 1994. Number 6. Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel Murderer. We call him Jack the Ripper, but we don't really know who the person behind one of the older and most notorious murder sprees was. Whoever he or she really was, Jack the Ripper was definitely deranged. In 1888, London's Whitechapel district was gripped by reports of a vicious serial killer stalking the city streets. He murdered 5 women, all prostitutes, by slitting the throats and abdomens. Sometimes he would even remove the woman's uterus and take it as a sort of prize. Police surmised the killer was a surgeon, butcher, or someone skilled with a scalpel. The killer mocked the community and the police by sending letters outlining the acts. Although many suspects have been named over the years, the killer has never been identified. Without modern forensic techniques, Victorian police were at a loss in investigating the Ripper's heinous crimes. After taking his final victim in November, the killer seemed to disappear like a ghost. Number 5. Andrei Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov. Chikatilo was nicknamed the Butcher of Rostov, the Red Ripper, and the Rostov Ripper. Between 1978 and 1990, the Russian serial killer Andrei Chikatilo sexually assaulted, murdered, and mutilated more than 50 young women and children. Chikatilo killed his victims by stabbing and slashing them with a knife. One of the youngest was 9 years old. Chikatilo later admitted that he was only able to achieve orgasm by stabbing women, a fact which made it difficult for him to resist his strong urges to kill. Andrei, the Butcher of Rostov, said, "When I used my knife, it brought psychological relief. I know I have to be destroyed. I was a mistake of nature." Though he confessed to a total of 56 brutal murders, he was tried for 53, sentenced to death, and executed by firing squad in 1994. Number 4. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. No list of the most deranged serial killers would be complete without Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was ultimately convicted of murdering 17 young men over a 14-year period. Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978 when he was just 18. He would go on killing until his arrest in 1991. The police discovered photographs of dismembered bodies, the severed heads and genitalia of several other men, and a tub full of acid that Dahmer had used to dispose of some of his 17 victims. Dahmer admitted to drilling a hole into his victims' heads in an attempt to turn them into mindless sex slaves. Dahmer's sensational trial, featuring lurid descriptions of his eating the body parts of some of his victims and admissions of necrophilia, renewed the world's interest in serial killers. In 1992, Dahmer was sentenced to 957 years in jail, but was killed by a fellow inmate just 2 years later. Number 3. Harold Shipman, Dr. Death. One of history's deadliest serial killers was a married family man, nicknamed Dr. Death. Harold Shipman is thought to be responsible for murdering 218 of his patients between 1972 and 1998. In reality, the number of people he murdered is likely much higher. As a practicing physician, Shipman had easy access to potential victims, which is why he was able to be such a prolific killer without raising suspicion. However, because Shipman was involved in so many cases in which patients died, people eventually began to suspect foul play. Most of his victims were elderly women, whom he said had died in their sleep, but many of these women died during the day, which struck some as odd. Additionally, Shipman asked for an unusually large number of cremation certificates, which caught the attention of an undertaker who reported the odd circumstances of the cremations. Eventually, Shipman was convicted in 2000, but only after a victim's daughter reported that he had tried to write a will for the victim that would name him as the beneficiary. He died by suicide in prison in 2004. He never admitted to any of the killings. Number 2. H. Holmes, the Beast of Chicago. Chicago has had its share of killers, but perhaps none more haunting than H. Holmes, the pharmacist who turned a hotel into a torture castle, later called the Murder Castle. Ahead of the 1893 World's Fair, Holmes moved to Chicago and started outfitting a 3-story hotel with all manner of nefarious contraptions, including gas lines, secret passages and trapdoors, hallways to dead ends, soundproofed padding, and torture devices strewn throughout a maze. The gas allowed Holmes to knock out his guests before the worst of what was to happen came next, often on his surgical tables. He then burned the bodies in the building's furnace, selling skeletons to medical schools and running life insurance scams. In all, he copped to more than 30 murders, found only after a fellow scammer turned him in for falling short on a financial agreement, before he was hanged in 1896. Number 1. Ted Bundy, Lady Killer. You don't have to be American or have been around in the 1970s to know the name Ted Bundy. Handsome, well-educated, and brimming with charm, Ted Bundy seemed the unlikeliest of serial killers. His modus operandi included kidnapping his female victims, raping them, and then dismembering them. He often kept their heads as souvenirs. Following a difficult adolescence, Bundy graduated from the University of Washington and soon embarked on his murderous spree, killing his first victim in Seattle in 1966. Focusing primarily on attractive college co-eds, Bundy committed a series of murders across the Pacific Northwest. He continued on to Utah and Colorado, killing several more women before being arrested. Despite being convicted of kidnapping, he managed to escape police custody not once, but twice, while awaiting trial in Colorado. He moved to Florida, where he killed several members of a sorority and his final victim, a 12-year-old girl who he raped and murdered. When Bundy was finally apprehended while driving a stolen car a week after his last murder, his trial quickly became a media sensation. It was the first murder trial to be fully televised. Before he was eventually executed in an electric chair in 1989, Bundy admitted to kidnapping and murdering 30 women, though this number is almost certainly much higher. That's all from my side today. Please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for more of our videos. Thanks for watching.